In the early 1940s, the world was burning, Europe was at war, the Pacific was chaos, and the fate of democracy itself hung in the balance. But behind the beaches of Normandy, the skies over Britain, and the streets of Berlin, there was another battlefield, one hidden in the shadows. This is the story of how the Mafia, America's organized crime syndicate, secretly helped the Allies win World War II. It sounds like something out of a movie, gangsters and generals teaming up to fight Nazis, but as strange as it seems, this unlikely partnership really happened, and it all began with a single problem: the docks of New York City. In 1942, months after Pearl Harbor, the United States was on high alert. German submarines, U-boats, lurked off the East Coast, sinking Allied supply ships faster than America could replace them. The harbor in New York, one of the busiest in the world, became a crucial military target. But then, something mysterious happened. Ships started catching fire, equipment disappeared. Rumors spread of Nazi spies sabotaging American vessels right under the Navy's nose. The docks, filled with thousands of longshoremen, smugglers, and gangsters, were a perfect hiding place for espionage. The US Navy knew it had a problem, but it didn't know where to look. And that's when they made one of the most unexpected decisions of the war. They turned to the Mafia for help. At the time, the New York docks were unofficially ruled by one man, Charles Lucky Luciano. Luciano was one of the most powerful mob bosses in America. Even though he was serving time in a New York prison for running a prostitution ring, his influence stretched across the entire underworld, from the Italian mob to the dock unions themselves. The Navy needed control over the waterfront, and Luciano was the only man who could give it to them. Through an operation later called Operation Underworld, U.S. naval intelligence quietly reached out to members of the Mafia, starting with Meyer Lansky, one of Luciano's trusted associates. Lansky, who despised fascism, agreed to act as a go-between. He met with naval officers and arranged a secret deal. If the Mafia helped secure the docks and stop sabotage, the government would ease up on their prosecution, and maybe even consider reducing Luciano's sentence. From that moment on, the Mafia became an unofficial ally of the US Navy. Gangsters began patrolling the docks, enforcing security in their own way. Anyone suspected of working with the Axis, or even asking too many questions, disappeared. Almost overnight, the sabotage stopped. The waterfront became one of the most secure military zones in America, not because of Marines or FBI agents, but because of mobsters. But the Mafia's help didn't end in New York. The real turning point came a year later, in 1943, when the Allies were preparing to invade Sicily. Sicily was a fortress. German troops and Italian fascists controlled the island, and Allied generals knew the invasion would be brutal. But the US needed intelligence, maps, guides, and inside information. And they realized there was one group that already had deep roots there: the Sicilian Mafia. For decades, the Mafia had been suppressed under Mussolini, who saw them as a threat to his regime. Many mob leaders were arrested or exiled, and they hated the fascists for it. Now, with the Americans coming, they saw their chance for revenge. Through Luciano's contacts in New York, American intelligence reached out to Mafia figures in Sicily. Local bosses provided maps of the coastline, details on fascist troop movements, and even pointed out landing zones for the Allied invasion. When the Allies finally landed on Sicily in July 1943, the invasion, codenamed Operation Husky, succeeded faster than expected. Within weeks, Mussolini's regime collapsed, and the Allies gained a vital foothold in southern Europe. Some historians argue that the Mafia's information and cooperation were key factors in the quick victory. Others say the help was exaggerated after the war, but one thing's for sure: their influence didn't end there. After the war, the Mafia regained power in Sicily. Many of the old bosses who had helped the Allies were rewarded, not officially, but with protection and political connections. In the chaos of post-war Italy, the Mafia became stronger than ever. Back in America, Lucky Luciano was released from prison in 1946, his sentence reduced in part for his wartime cooperation. Officially, the US government never admitted the deal, but the timing was no coincidence. Luciano was deported to Italy, where he lived out the rest of his life, rich, infamous, and proud of his secret role in the war. The story of the Mafia and World War II sits in a strange gray zone between myth and history. For years, details of Operation Underworld were buried in classified Navy archives. When they finally came to light in the 1970s, the world was shocked to learn that America's most powerful criminals had once worked hand in hand with the military. It's a story that challenges what we think we know about morality in war. In times of desperation, the line between right and wrong can blur, and sometimes victory comes from the most unlikely allies. Because in the darkest days of World War II, when Nazi submarines prowled the Atlantic and fascism threatened the world, the US Navy turned to the underworld, and the Mafia answered the call. Even today, historians still debate how much difference the Mafia's involvement really made. Did they actually stop Nazi sabotage? Did they truly guide the Allies through Sicily? Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, a mix of fact, rumor, and self-promotion from men who lived in the shadows. But whether the Mafia's help was small or significant, their story reminds us that history is rarely black and white. It's a web of power, survival, and unlikely alliances, where even criminals can become patriots, if only for a moment in time. And that's the story of how gangsters helped win World War II, not with guns in the trenches, but with information, influence, and a shared enemy. The next time you think about the Mafia, remember, behind their crimes and violence lies one of the strangest wartime partnerships in history, because sometimes the fight for freedom isn't clean. Sometimes it's fought in the shadows,